Hello and welcome to the second segment of Windows Enumeration, the 23rd video as part of our Red Team Fundamentals mini-series. In our previous video, if you have watched it, you may recall that many of the actions we took to enumerate a system were done so manually. That is, for each observable, such as information regarding our operating system's build, user, network information, and so forth, were all gathered using standalone commands. Now, although we managed to gather comprehensive information that may assist us with persistence, privilege escalation, and lateral movement, manual enumeration is extremely time consuming. As time is limited and assessments often have strict deadlines, we need a faster enumeration method, and in this video we will explore two approaches for achieving this using two specific third-party tools. As always, everything we teach in this video is purely for educational purposes. We accept no responsibility for your actions. Now, before we delve into the two tools covered in this video, it is important to understand the several issues associated with manual enumeration. In our previous video, which ran for approximately half an hour, we discussed a dozen areas for enumeration when assessing a Windows system. However, in that video, we've only scratched the surface of what can be gathered on a local Windows system, and for the most part, we covered the observables you are most likely to encounter. In reality, manual enumeration is immensely time-consuming and can take hours or even days to complete, depending on the environment. However, when we are given an assessment scope, we will also be given a time frame for how long that assessment will last, and we must make informed judgments about where to focus our efforts. Therefore, to reduce the time required to enumerate a system, we can instead leverage third-party tools such as WinPEAS and Seatbelt to automate this process. Not only does automation markedly reduce enumeration time, but it also provides more comprehensive and enriched results that might otherwise be missed during manual enumeration, and such oversights could prove significant when attempting to advance further in an assessment. Having said that, let's take a look at how we can compile these tools and leverage them during our assessments. So to start off, we've got WinPEAS, which is perhaps one of the most comprehensive automated enumeration tools, and WinPEAS comes part of the PEAS and G suite, which I believe stands for Privilege Escalation Awesome Script Suite. I could be totally wrong, but essentially it is a collection of tools that enable us to perform enumeration across a different set of operating systems. For example, you've got macOS, Linux, and in our case, Windows. Now, most of its documentation will be found within the WinPEAS folder, and as part of this folder, you'll find some information regarding the specific flavors, or more specifically executable of WinPEAS. So for example, you've got your standard .NET exe executable. You can also execute WinPEAS as part of a PowerShell script, and then additionally you can execute WinPEAS as a batch script. Now, depending on the method you choose for execution, you'll find its relevant information in its respective folder, and as we'll be using its standard .NET assembly, you can find all of its information as part of the WinPEAS exe folder. And then as part of this folder, you can find various different methods for WinPEAS execution. For example, you can download the executable directly, drop it onto disk and execute it that way. However, as the comment indicates, this is super noisy, as after all, we are dropping the file onto disk, which any capable antivirus solution would be able to pick it up immediately. But then there's also mechanisms in which you can evade certain detections by loading the assembly in memory. So I suggest that you take a look at some of these ways of execution and try some of these out yourself. If you scroll down here a little, you'll find some examples of how to use the tool, and we'll get into it shortly. And then scrolling down here a little further, you'll find some information about the color coding that WinPEAS uses. So for example, anything that is color coded in red typically indicates a special privilege over an object, or whether something is misconfigured or a vulnerability. So essentially anything that could be directly or indirectly used to escalate privileges, maybe even perform persistence or lateral movement, and anything marked in red will be what we are mostly after. Green will often indicate that some sort of protection is in place, or whether something is well configured. Cyan, I never really know how to pronounce it, but anything marked in this color will indicate active users. Anything marked in blue will indicate disabled users, and then anything marked in yellow will indicate links. So whenever you are running WinPEAS, this color coding is really useful purely because it helps us focus on relevant points of interest that may help us achieve our objectives in privilege escalation, lateral movement, or whatever our objectives are. And we'll see how all of this comes useful very shortly. Also, we can take a look at the checks that WinPEAS performs. So by expanding this details drop-down menu, we can see here that WinPEAS performs some basic system information gathering, checks whether credential guard is enabled, checks for Microsoft updates, environment variables. And as you scroll down here, you'll see that it performs a lot more information gathering than what we've discussed in our previous manual enumeration video. And attempting to enumerate for all of these observables manually would most likely take you several days or so. Now, there are several different ways in which you can set WinPEAS up. You can compile manually using Visual Studio, and we've discussed how you can do this in one of our previous videos. But you can also find a pre-compiled executable as part of its releases section. And if you scroll down here a little, you'll find all of the relevant assemblies. Now, you will also notice that besides the standard WinPEAS assembly, you also have an assembly that has the OFS extension added to it. And this extension signifies that the executable was obfuscated prior to compiling. So say, for example, there may be some defensive solutions on the target system that you are enumerating. You might have more success by using the obfuscated version rather than the standard vanilla one. Now, if you want to try this out, I will leave it as an exercise for you to do after this video. And do let me know in the comments below if it was successful with something like Microsoft Defender. But in our case, we will be using the standard vanilla version. And go into my tools directory and then use curl with the L switch to follow any redirects and the uppercase O switch to save the file within the current directory. And once downloaded, we should have the executable present. So to list the tool's supported command line arguments and other switches, we can use the H switch. And then you'll see here as part of the output, we are provided with the listing of all of the tools supported capabilities. Now, amongst the most important set of options are the modules that WinPEAS supports. So as you can see here, WinPEAS supports several different modules that gather their own relevant information. For example, if we are enumerating the domain and the domain specific information, we can use the domain module, or maybe even if we want to gather user specific information, we can use the user info module, maybe even network relevant information, in which case we can use the network info module, and the list goes on. However, when you want to enumerate for all observables that WinPEAS supports, you can use the all module. And this module will provide you with the most amount of information about the target system. Okay, so we can provide that as an argument to the tool. And because the checks it performs can take a significant amount of time to avoid our command's timeout, we can set a value anything other than 1 minute. And in this case, 300 seconds just ensures that the command runs for 5 minutes before terminating. And with our command ready, we can execute it, and just keep in mind that this can take a while, so just give it some time. However, once the tool finishes its execution, you'll see that here we are provided with a comprehensive amount of information that again would have taken us days to enumerate manually. And just to kind of give you an idea, let's just start from the top and make our way down. So at first here you can see we've got some basic system information that we previously gathered using Sliver's info command. So here you can see the name of the specific OS. In this case, we are running Microsoft Windows 11 Pro. We can also see the specific version of the OS, the host name of the system, the domain to which it is joined, and then additional information that we previously gathered. Scrolling down here even further, we can find some user specific environment variables. So we can see the username or the user under which our sliver implant is running, the specific OS as well. And then as we scroll down, we will be presented with even more interesting information. For example, winPEAS performs checks over the AlwaysInstallElevated registry value. And then whenever this value is set to 1 within the HKLM and HKCU hive, it will indicate that we are capable of installing MSI packages with the highest privileges possible. More specifically, the local system privileges. And because this is set to 1, this would be a capable means of privilege escalation. And if you ever come across an observable that you don't really know much information about, winPEAS will often provide you with a link to its wiki page where you can learn more about the specific observable and its potential means of exploit. And then browsing to it, you'll see that we are provided with a little bit more context over what winPEAS has discovered. Now we'll get into this value a little bit later in this mini course and how we can escalate privileges with it. But just note that whenever you don't understand anything, winPEAS will often provide you with a link to gain some more understanding over that specific observable. As we continue to scroll down, I will find a listing of previously logged in users, and then some home folders of any system users, and if we are lucky, cleartext credentials. So as you can see here, when winPEAS was performing its registry enumeration, it managed to stumble across some values that are used when the system is booted to enable automatic logon. And these credentials could be used for something like lateral movement within a domain. Now, naturally, I'm not going to go into each observable. We will revisit some of these when we are performing privilege escalation and persistence. But the key takeaway here is that winPEAS allows us to perform automated enumeration in a much more streamlined manner. And I'll leave it as an exercise for you to explore some of these other observables that winPEAS enumerates for and their means for potential abuse. Now, because the all argument performs enumeration across all of the supported tools observables, it can be pretty bad OPSEC when we are running this within an assessment, because the points that winPEAS checks for can quickly be picked up by defenders' tools. So to reduce the amounts of artifacts that we leave behind, whenever we want to perform specific enumeration across a specific set of modules, we can use those modules individually rather than using the all module. So in our case, we are going to use user info to gather some more information about the current user, and then network info to gather more information about the current network configuration. And whenever we want to use one or more specific modules, we can simply separate them by using a space. And by executing this command, winPEAS will now only focus on user and network specific information. So as you can see here, once the command finishes running, you'll see that we are provided with a listing of the information that we specifically searched for. Now, just to wrap up on winPEAS, before you run the tool, you can specify the log argument with a path to a output file where all of the tools enumeration points, or all of the tools output that is, will be logged to. Now this will save the file on disk. Now if you remember our discussions on Sliver's looting capabilities, certain commands within Sliver allow us to store the output of those commands as loot. And what this will do is it will store the output as part of a centralized database that all operators can view without them having to rerun the tool a second time. So regardless of whether you are using the log argument or the X switch to store the output as part of the centralized loot store, by storing it, it prevents us from having to run the tool more than once. So if you understand winPEAS, you will also understand Seatbelt. And both are very similar tools, and although Seatbelt may not be as directly informative as winPEAS through its color coding, Seatbelt nonetheless has its own capabilities, which we'll shortly explore. Now in its repository, you'll find all of its relevant information. However, Seatbelt does not come with a pre-compiled release, which means we will have to compile ourselves. It's also worth mentioning that Seatbelt is not as frequently updated as winPEAS is. As you can see there, its last commit was on January the 10th of 2025, which was around a year ago now, but nonetheless, it still remains an efficient tool. So just copy the repository link, and then on our Windows machine, clone the repository. select yes to update the target.NET framework version, and then select its release configuration and build the solution. And then once compiled, we should have its executable. Now, once we list the Seatbelt's help menu, you'll see that we are provided with a listing of all of its supported commands. And its command, once executed, performs its relevant enumeration. However, you'll also notice that some of these commands have a little plus icon next to them. And what this signifies is that the available command supports remote usage. More specifically, that command can be executed on a different system across the network. Obviously, where privileges allow, but we'll get into that shortly. Now, in addition to commands, Seatbelt also supports a list of groups, and a group, well, groups specific commands as part of it and enumerates that relevant group's information. Now, there are several different groups here. We've got system, Slack, Chromium, remote, and the groups that you use will depend on the information you are gathering. And to specify the specific group that we want to use, we simply use the group switch. Now, like WinPEAS, Seatbelt also supports the all argument, and this performs all of the checks that Seatbelt is built to perform. And remember, whenever we are performing such comprehensive searches, it is important to specify a timeout value, anything other than 1 minute, because the all argument in this case will perform all checks, which can take a significant amount of time. Anyway, once our command is ready, we can execute it, give it some time to collect all of the information. And once executed, like WinPEAS, Seatbelt provides us with a huge listing of information, unfortunately not color-coded, but nonetheless still very comprehensive. So if we go from the top down again, you'll see that we are provided with some information regarding the antivirus solutions on the system, whether App Locker is present, the ARP table. Another important observable here is Credman's credentials. So taking a look at some of these, we can see that we have some credentials for RDP, for the Web 1 system, judging off the SBN here, term serve. Then also we have the username and then also the password. And then as we continue down here, we get a lot more information than what would have been obtainable through manual enumeration. Now remember, I said that whenever you are enumerating across a tool's entire capabilities for enumeration, it's not really OPSEC safe because it can touch sensitive components of a system to which the blue team can respond. And whenever we want to enumerate for a specific set of information using Seatbelt, we can use individual commands. And to do so, we will need a name of the command. So in this case, we will use OS-info and processes. And then whenever we are specifying those commands, we will specify them delineated by a space, as we have done with WinPEAS when we were using modules. Okay, so let's run the command. And as you can see here, once executed, we get a little less information, but now we aren't performing the checks that we don't want to perform. And then we could continue adding as many observables as we want to as part of that command to enumerate for additional enumeration points. Now, one of the useful capabilities of Seatbelt is that it is capable of performing remote enumeration. And whenever we are performing remote enumeration, we will have to specify the name of the target system and then optionally a set of credentials that is a username or password. Now, one useful group that Seatbelt supports is called remote, and essentially it enumerates all of the remote observables of a target system. So I'll specify remote here for the group, and then additionally the name of the computer. And in our case, this will be agent C. Okay, once ready, we can execute it. And if our privileges allow, we will see the information of the remote system. Now, when our permissions do not allow, we will see an exception being raised, indicating that access is denied. And in these cases, if we know the credentials of a remote administrator of that system or any other user that is permitted to access that system remotely, we can provide those credentials with a username and password values. So in this case, as you can see, I'm providing a password of a domain admin. And if we run this command now, you should see that we get the relevant output. Now, to prevent having to run the tool more than once, we can provide the output file switch, including the location to where our output will be saved. And remember, this will store the output file on disk. So instead we can use the X switch to save that output as loot. And that concludes the second part of Windows enumeration. I hope you can now see how automated enumeration complements manual enumeration, ensuring that whenever you are working on a tight schedule, you know which tools to use and how to apply them. In the following videos, we will focus on persistence. We have enumerated the local system, and to avoid losing access and having to repeat the initial foothold, which, bear in mind, may or may not work the second time round, we will now embed ourselves into the system, ensuring that even if the user terminates the implant process, logs out, or even reboots the system, our access will not be affected. In the meantime, feel free to join our Discord server to stay up to date with us, explore our courses, soon to be released labs, and one of the finest red teaming courses available. I've left a link to our group in the description below. Until then, stay safe and I will see you in the next one.